let's talk about like him or aspiration, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the first person that comes to mind when you talk about aspiration is obviously Sultan Mehmed II, right? Is that is he truly the one that embodies that spirit of of aspiration amongst the Ottoman sultans, or is there somebody else out there that we're missing that we're kind of sleeping on?
I think Bayezid Yildirim, which is known as the Thunderbolt,
Okay,
and even Murad Khudavandigar before him, who goes into the Balkans. I think the early Ottomans, the exceptional willingness to keep driving and moving forward is something which becomes internalized, at least within the sort of like Ottoman culture, if you want to call it that, the early Ottoman culture, to the point that it becomes internalized by Fatih in some ways. Why Fatih is exceptional though, I mean, he's a young guy who's part of a worldview in which people forget there are many people converting to Islam.
at that time.
At that time, right? Because the Ottomans have just conquered the Balkans and so forth. And people forget this, that the drive towards Constantinople predominantly is this new group of Muslims who are surrounding Fatih, who are driven to saying, we can do this. And there is a particular zeal.
So new converts. The new convert zeal.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. That's not to say that there wasn't a Turkic component to it.
Sure.
But there is this zeal from the Balkans that's driving them on and saying, we can achieve this. And Fatih himself, you have to accept that he is exceptional in that sense, in terms of he has this unique type of drive. Because people don't realize this, that even during the attempts to conquer Constantinople, and even prior to it, there were a lot of naysayers. There are a lot of people saying, you can't do this is impossible, this is a forbidden fruit, leave it alone.
Can you really, by the way, elaborate, make an analogy, Constantinople between a city of today's diamond age? Because I don't think people sometimes, forget like how relevant, like what Constantinople was as a city.
I'm not sure in terms of how you can compare it to today's age, but it is the center of Christendom. It is at least in the imagination still, even though it's not the same type of Eastern Roman Empire, but it is, you have to understand, even in the imagination at the time, this was a center of a civilization, right? And in that sense, Constantinople reflected a imagination of the Roman Empire in the way that I don't think sometimes people of today's age can appreciate. Look, when we're talking about Rasul Sallam, let's just say, for example, right?
Yep.
A lot of the battles regarding the early Muslims were against the Byzantines. So imagine how far the Byzantines stretched, right? And that was continuously in the Muslim mind, that this was the obstacle. It wasn't Rome, it was the Byzantines who were continuously restricting the spreading of Islam into that region. And so the imagination of taking the center of it finally by Fatih was exceptional. But what's weird is that, I mean, it's not weird, but there was a faction of doves at the time who were saying, just leave it and let it be, and this is the status quo. We've tried it before, we didn't achieve it, and why do we need to disrupt the sort of like configuration that we have in terms of the political landscape of the region? And Fatih was like, no, we're going to go for this. And then when they were trying to conquer Constantinople and the ships kept being sunk, there was in the forces themselves, we read about this, that they were in disarray, they were being demotivated. They were saying, look, the Sultan is too young, he's made a mistake, what's going on here? And Fatih turned to his sheikh, Akshamsuddin, and he's like, probably, and I'm speculating, but asking him, like, have we made a mistake? What are we doing? I mean, this idea of despair is in all of us. This is why, I read Surah Duha,
right,
in that sense. And so this is, yes, Fatih is a great leader, but at that moment, you realize he's human too. There's a human component here, and that he's very stoic, but there is a moment that he has his doubts because the conditions show those doubts. But what did they do? I mean, Akshamsuddin says, we can achieve this, it's possible, keep going, have tawakkul in Allah Ta'ala. They chop down logs, take their boats over the hill. Now, what's interesting here is two things. One, there's a particular level of ingenuity in that community. There's an intelligence in that community that we don't appreciate. That they knew exactly that they need to do this to achieve their end goal. But a second thing, they trusted the leadership. There was a trust in the leader, that the choice he was making, that we should try it, we should go for it. And alhamdulillah, for them, they were successful and they achieved it. And that, I think, says something about the leadership qualities of Fatih too. It's not just the zeal and the himma and so forth. It's the idea that when people say that this is unachievable, and you do get doubts in your head, but there are people at the same time who are giving you advice saying this is possible. And Fatih went with his instinct to some degree and ignored the naysayers and kept pushing forward.
But also knew where his strengths within his organization was.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Right? I mean, not everyone's not going to be a jack of all, know everything, right?
Absolutely, and when you look at how Fatih look, it's not just the taking of the city; it's the policies that Fatih has, the restructuring of the city, the architectural reconstruction of the city, the Islamization of Istanbul, and so forth. Clearly, Fatih and the intelligentsia he has around them are of a particular disposition of recognizing these things. And I think that's what people sometimes miss, that, there is a particular type of intellectual current that's running through that generation of Ottomans. And it's a generational one. It's a young generation. And it's a generation that's able to achieve these sort of changes that was impactful to the point that you have Selim and his ambitions, like Fatih, to go down and take on the Mamluks.
And he was what, 19?
Fatih.
Yeah.
They say between 19 to 21. So.
And that's the thing. We're like some 19-year-old. In our day and age, we're like, this is a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when there's a joke in Turkey that fathers always tell their kids, like, you're playing PlayStation and Fatih conquered Constantinople. This is the constant joke. And then kids will say something back to their fathers, like saying, yeah, but, here's a whole army behind him who wanted to support him.
They never said, well, I had a father like Mehmed I.
Well, look, when you see in the case of Murad and so forth, I mean, no, kids will be kids. But it is interesting in the sense that the early Ottomans, then, what you learn is they have a different conception of what it means to be a man. They have a different conception of how they see power. And that power, although we assume because we're sultanic centered, that it's in the hands of one, but it actually is dependent on a group of people who are your supported aides. We see this in the case of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam Sahaba. So in the Fatih's case, he had multiple people around him who were able to support the type of decisions he wanted to make. And that, I think, is important.